The Golden State San Francisco Warrior fan from as long as I can remember, and I want to congratulate all the other Warrior fans who are either recovering from last night's victory or here with us this morning. And also congratulations also to all the people from Cleveland. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers played a remarkable game yesterday, and there's something we can all learn from teamwork and not deciding that you're a superstar and you want to let somebody else have their share. So hopefully we'll learn those lessons here in the legislative arena. We're going to start with a brief oversight hearing with the Department of Toxic Substance cost recovery efforts. Now, last year, the California State Auditors released an audit on DTSC's cost recovery activities and found that there's nearly $200 million worth of unrecovered state costs. Now, in September, this committee conducted its first hearing to discuss the audit and its recommendations with the department and the auditor. Today's hearing revisits that discussion to get a progress report on the department's efforts on the cost recovery. After we have the oversight hearing, we will convene the legislative hearings, and we'll start with a special order of business and hear the Assembly's Environmental Safety and Toxic Material Committee's 4 bills, AB 273 through 276, which make statutory reforms to DTSC's cost recovery process. And then we'll proceed with the rest of the file. So there's 10 items on today's file. Item number 6 for everyone here, which is AB 323 by Assemblymember Olson is on consent. And with that, I'd like to convene the oversight hearing with DTSC and welcome the DTSC Director, Barbara Lee. Good morning, Director Lee. And welcome members.
I would like to inquire, did you match today? Was this part of the memo? Very impressive.
And green, I would point out.
Right.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. As you said, my name is Barbara Lee, and I'm the Director of the Department of Toxic Substances Control. With me today is Ms. Terry Hardy, my Special Assistant for Program Review. I would like to thank you for having me here today to talk about our progress implementing the auditor's recommendations regarding our cost recovery efforts. We've taken these recommendations very seriously. As you know, our primary mission is protecting public health and the environment, but we're also charged with managing the state's funds responsibly, and the recommendations in the audit report addressing them is one of our highest priorities. In the past year, working with resources approved by the legislature, we've made significant progress, and I'm happy to outline that for you today. If you'll recall from my presentation in March, since 1987, we've spent approximately $1.9 billion to clean up contaminated sites in California. About 10% of these costs were not reconciled, and that created a backlog of unresolved costs. In March of 2013, the department publicly disclosed that backlog. Initially, we determined that the backlog was about $184 million at 2,700 sites in the state that were cleaned up between July of 1987 and December of 2012. Subsequently, the auditor's findings, which included another year of data, set the backlog amount at $194 million. That $194 million in unresolved costs owed to the department, included funds owed to the department as well as payments or costs that were not properly accounted for or documented. Meanwhile, our work had reduced the number of sites from 2,700 to 1,621 at the time that the audit was released. The auditor made 11 recommendations for improvements, and I'll update you on the status of those recommendations in a moment. First, I wanted to talk about how the backlog occurred and some of the steps we've taken to resolve it. Until recently, standardized cost recovery procedures did not exist at DTSC. Computer systems used by people in the field and people in billing were not linked, and the information often was not shared. Sometimes cleanup efforts were initiated to protect public health, and cost recovery was not pursued until sometime later, sometimes significantly later. Project managers, that is the scientists and engineers who oversee the cleanup, were also put in charge of recovering the costs. Not only does that require a different skill set, the time that they would spend on cost recovery competed with the cleanup work that protects the public, and they often would prioritize public health over cost recovery. Once we publicly disclosed our backlog, we began an intensive effort to determine the scope of the problem, and we started implementing changes to standardize and improve our cost recovery procedures and better define internal roles and responsibilities for cost recovery. In the current budget, we received $1.6 million in 14 two-year limited-term positions to evaluate and take action to reduce unaccounted-for costs, as well as improve our procedures going forward. Some of the employees hired under that budget augmentation are administrative project managers. Their job is to take over the administrative work that the scientists and engineers had been asked to do in the past. These APMs, as we call them, now act as a vital hub in the wheel in our cost recovery efforts. A key step was to make sure that all of the staff involved understands and follows our procedures for recovering costs. We standardized our process by developing 27 specific and detailed cost recovery procedures to ensure consistent and rigorous pursuit of reimbursements. We trained everyone who has any role at all in cost recovery, and that's nearly 400 staff people, in the use of these procedures. Later in 2014, 200 of those staff were given additional targeted training. We created a centralized electronic tracking tool that provides a visual dashboard of performance metrics. It monitors workflow and identifies bottlenecks and measures progress in resolving costs. Now I'd like to update you on our bottom line cost recovery numbers. These are represented in the pie chart in your packet. It looks like this. As I noted, we have spent approximately $1.9 billion cleaning up contaminated sites in California since 1987. Of that, we did not resolve 10%, or $194 million. As of the beginning of this month, nearly $60 million of that $194 million backlog has been resolved. This includes more than $6 million in cash collected, an accounting of sites where we've determined there is no viable person who can pay the bill, and data errors that we have cleaned up. That means we have resolved an additional $8 million in costs since I last updated the committee 3 months ago. In addition to the amount resolved, sites accounting for about $67 million in unresolved costs have been referred to the Attorney General's office, are being prepared for legal action, or are in bankruptcy. As we continue to analyze our backlog, we anticipate that more costs will end up in litigation and will result in more dollars collected. The auditor recommended that the department look into writing off small balances of $5,000 or less. DTSC has determined it costs more to pursue those costs than can be collected from the responsible party. AB 274, which you are hearing in this committee later today, would allow the department to write off a significant portion of unresolved costs up to $5,000. Those sites would total about $1 million in unrecovered costs and include almost half of our remaining unresolved sites. We have prioritized our cost recovery work, focusing first on sites with costs of more than $1 million and those sites where the statute of limitations will soon be expiring. We are on track to resolve the remaining $66 million by the end of the coming fiscal year. To summarize, in the last year, the department has resolved or referred for legal action nearly 2/3 of the unrecovered costs from 1987. Turning now to the audit, of the 11 recommendations made by the auditor, 9 called for action by DTSC and 2 recommended action by the legislature. In the 10 months since the audit report was released, we've submitted mandatory reports on our progress as required in October 2014 and this past February. Another report is due in 2015. At this time, DTSC has fully implemented 6 of its 9 recommendations. There is an updated status chart in your materials. Looks like this. You will note the sections that are highlighted in yellow. Those sections reflect the progress made since the last time I updated you in March. Among the actions completed, the department developed an electronic reporting system to monitor statute of limitations dates so collection opportunities are not missed. We established settlement tracking procedures to ensure agreements and the resulting payments are recorded and the billing system is accurately updated. We also standardized the way the department conducts its searches to ensure that all responsible parties and project proponents are identified and invoiced. There are 3 audit recommendations we have partially implemented. One recommendation calls for the department to update our policies and procedures on liens. As you know, a December 2014 court decision questioned whether our lien process violated due process. DTSC is working in conjunction with the Attorney General's Office to finalize a revised lien policy this August that addresses the court's concerns as well as makes other improvements. Another recommendation calls for DTSC to review the accuracy and ensure the data before putting the information in our fiscal system. We are conducting this review as we analyze each site in the backlog. So far, the review has been completed for sites totaling $127 million of unaccounted for costs. In December, the department learned that Fiscal will be unable to meet our billing system needs. We are in the process of identifying a platform that will meet our needs, and we hope to begin building that system in 2017. Finally, the auditors recommended the department investigate its authority to write off outstanding backlog costs of less than $5,000. The auditor agreed with the department's analysis that found it was not cost-effective to pursue those small amounts. DTSC has drafted guidance on writing off costs under $500, consistent with state policy. But in addition, the Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee introduced AB 274, which authorizes a one-time write-off of small amounts receivable up to $5,000. If that bill becomes law, it would allow DTSC to write off nearly half of the remaining backlog sites. The state audit also recommended 2 actions by the legislature. The auditor found that the department's interest rate is too low to adequately discourage late payments. Assembly Safety and Toxic Materials Committee's AB 273 would authorize DTSC to increase its interest rate from 0.249% to 10% on late payments, and that would be 7% for local governments. The auditor also recommended that the legislature should give DTSC the authority to require additional information from potentially responsible parties. Assembly Environmental Safety and Toxic Materials Committee's AB 276 would allow the department to collect information regarding a party's ability to pay and determine whether to pursue cost recovery. Looking forward, in the coming fiscal year, we are on track to resolve the remaining $66 million in unaccounted for costs. That's associated with a remaining 583 sites. We will continue to work on sites involved in litigation and settlement talks. fully integrate enhanced cost recovery procedures into our program work. And some of the ways we're ensuring we don't build another backlog include assuring voluntary cleanup agreements and/or unilateral orders are properly executed before the department accrues any cleanup costs. We're reviewing and modifying as needed all draft invoices to make sure they are accurate and defensible in case we have to take legal action to recover our costs. We're reviewing our grant requirements and our state Superfund contracts to ensure adequate funding and accurate invoicing. We're promptly tracking and addressing aging receivables. And we're working with legal staff to track and act upon sites where statute of limitations deadlines are approaching. In the past, our cost recovery problem was identified and re-identified, but only quick fixes were implemented. What those drills lacked and why our solution is different now is the fundamental change that we are bringing about. I and my leadership team continue to push forward on comprehensive reform. We're making sure all of our procedures are clear, complete, and effective. We're training staff on the new procedures, and we're underscoring the importance of accountability and transparency at every step. We put in place a tracking system to monitor and ensure that the process is followed and will be followed into the future. Thank you for your attention. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer your questions now, or I can wait until after the presentation by the auditor.
Well, thank you very much for that presentation. It shocks the conscience to think that we, as a legislature, set up a system where we want people who are in code enforcement to also be debt collectors, and then we're shocked that didn't happen. I think the decision to put public health and public safety over debt collection, if I'm playing Monday morning quarterback, is probably a good deal. I know that we've provided slots for temporary to address this backlog problem. So the question is, and you've highlighted how you've trained people and it got more targeted training going forward. Once we get into fiscal 17, 18, or wherever the amount is the permanent staff the division of power going to be so that we still have code enforcement really doing code enforcement and the debt collectors doing the debt collecting work?
It's an excellent question, Senator, and I'm taking a look at the structure of the cleanup program and our cost recovery efforts. We're monitoring the progress. I need to have a better understanding of what the long-term resources we're going to need will be before I make any judgments about whether we need any of these resources to become permanent. Part of that depends on the effectiveness of the training. Some of it may also depend on my ability to shift existing staff around so that I have the appropriate non-technical staff working on these issues going forward. But if I find I need additional administrative staff on a permanent basis, I'll make a proposal at that time.
The other thing, I know I don't want to get into the hearing on the bills, but it is in the auditor's report the $5,000 cutoff, and I think that's the traditional small claims action. Since this is sort of my background, there is a $5,000 recommendation that you be able to write off this bad debt, but if you actually put the resources in, which are already limited, it may cost you $7,800. Now, I'm not that smart, but why would I spend $7,800 in resources collecting a $5,000 debt just so I can feel good for the next audit report? I mean, that's, the bottom line is that I lost money. Do you have, I guess my question would be, is how many sites fall into this $5,000 to, let's call it $8,000 arena? Is it a limited, because you're asking for some authority, and we'll be dealing with that later on to strike or to.
So there are 565 sites that where we have unrecovered costs per site of less than $5,000. So that is about half of our remaining sites that we have unaccounted for costs. We also, it's about a third of the total that we started off with a year ago. The observation is a good one. I think the recognition that it costs more to recover those debts than we can collect from them is part of the reason why there are so many of them that have lingered and we haven't pursued them. That's not necessarily the best way to resolve the problem, but it's the way that the department did resolve it over the past. I will say that there are times when it is worth the cost to go after a small debt. We definitely don't want to send a signal to people that they get a free pass if they're under $5,000. And sometimes the message that you send by recovering costs in specific cases, it's important just from an overall standpoint of enforcing the department's requirements and helping the regulated community understand that those requirements are going to be enforced.
No, I don't necessarily disagree with you. What we're doing is we're basing a state auditor's recommendation to give you legislative authority. So in my point of view is that if somebody owes the department $5,001, that you are duty bound to go after that person and spend $7,800 with a prayer that you may collect something from a 1992 debt, because they just happen to, we're a base 10 society and we love these round figures, and we've got a big mess here and we're trying to clean it up, and I'm just trying to explore, somebody plucked $5,000 off the shelf, and that's grand. But how many sites are we talking about? And if we moved that to 8 or we moved it to 9, you can go after somebody who owes $100 if that's the authority that you have. We're trying to work out that relationship between the executive branch and the co-equal branch of government, the legislative branch. Other members of the committee, questions?
Just a couple thoughts. Obviously, to catch this on the front end saves you a heck of a lot on the back end. And so I appreciate your recognizing the importance of doing this. And, we just have far too many people who have taken no responsibility whatsoever for creating the conditions that they have, many of them being our larger businesses. But I do agree that it is a mindset, and if people feel that if it's under $5,000, they can get away with it. So I understand and support the decision-making that might also include statements that maybe it costs us $5,000 to get $5,000, but hopefully if it has a wider spread impact, that would be a good thing. My concern, though, is that I think you said that you received $1.6 million for 14 limited positions. My understanding is sometimes it's hard to get the kind of dedicated person that you need to do this job when they know that it's a limited time frame, and that after training a lot of these folks, they go off, and I don't blame them, to jobs that have more job security to them. So you do the training and you incur that expense, and then they go off and get a more permanent position. I'm wondering if you've found that experience here, and if there's anything that we could do going forward to try to minimize that sort of shrinking pool of committed people, because the incentive to do the work is that they're quickly looking for more long-term expectation.
Thank you for the question, Senator. There certainly are challenges in working with limited-term position allocations. I will say we very much understand the reservations of the legislature and others in the administration about providing new permanent positions to the department until we can demonstrate that we're using them responsibly and we're using these resources responsibly, and that's what we're trying to do right now. We actually have been very successful in our recruitment efforts and have gotten some very good people to fill these limited term positions. We do lose them. They do move on, and that creates challenges, but we've been very fortunate with the people that we have been able to bring on as limited term staff. I know that my special assistant would be very happy to keep some of them forever because they really are very good people. But we're taking a look at what the long-term needs are going to be, and we will come back with a proposal if we find that we need long-term resources.
Well, my suggestion is that they come on for a 3-year gig, they get trained, particularly industry, will grab up lots of good people after they've been trained, offer them significantly more money than get in the public sector. We're finding this now with trying to, with the oil spill that we had in Santa Barbara, that we didn't have enough people in the fire marshal's office because once they got trained, the industry took them to be their inspectors, such as they are, and paying them 2 or 3 times as much money. So, you know, the competition there from the private sector can be compelling and difficult to overcome. So that was my concern, not so much they stay 3 years and then their contract's up and they move on, but that during that 3-year period they get a better offer. So I'm wondering how you address that.
We have seen that. To the extent that we have positions that become vacant within the department and we can offer them permanent status work in another position and then redirect that position, we are doing that. And that's about the best we can do, with the constraints that we have. We have lost a couple of good people. It is a setback when that happens. You know, they know that these are 2-year limited term positions. They know that second year is gonna hit soon, and so they do start looking, and any of us would in that circumstance. We're just doing the best with that we can. Thank you.
Ms. Bates.
Thank you. Question, looking at the chart, one thing that concerns me is the $67 million that's litigation and bankruptcy. And what sort of due process, that's probably a little bigger than I mean, but what sort of interaction do you have with a company that receives a rather large fine and they have, could push them into bankruptcy? What sort of auditing do you do of that so that you have maybe some preemptive measures to engage with that company and help them meet their responsibility financially so that it doesn't move to bankruptcy through the litigation process? Because I know that does happen. And, I think we can be better stewards in terms of the way we assist people meeting their responsibility, doing the cleanup, public safety, but we don't drive them out of business because that's a huge hole. You have to get in line, right, in a bankruptcy court. So give me kind of a little idea of how you deal with companies that might be on that edge.
So,
excuse me, when you're doing that, could you distinguish between fines, I think, and then cost recovery so that we know what?
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Senator Bates. I have become more familiar with the challenges of companies in bankruptcy over the last few months than I had previously been.
I come from Orange County, mind you, where we had a big one.
And the chairman raises a good point, and that is mostly what we're dealing with here is cost recovery, not fines. So this is their financial responsibility for cleanup work that is being done as a result of contamination they've created. The legal action that's involved spans a number of different types of actions. It is not simply taking someone to court to recover money. Oftentimes, these are complicated sites. There are multiple potentially responsible parties, and we spend time in legal settlement discussions with a number of potentially responsible parties trying to sort out who's responsible for what, who will pay what, and on what schedule. And so there is the opportunity, especially where we have responsible parties who are facing some fiscal challenges of their own, to find payment schedules that they can meet so that they don't go into bankruptcy, because we completely understand that if they go into bankruptcy, then the cost of the cleanup shifts to our orphan share account, which is very much oversubscribed. So we explore a range of opportunities with them to make sure the payments get made. We also are looking to make sure that we aren't going after only one responsible party when there are multiple responsible parties involved. And so there's a lot of legal negotiating involved in that.
Thank you.
Clearly, the state auditor's recommendation number 7, which would give you more authority to get financial data on the front end of the responsible parties, would clarify the risk. There may be some risk anyway, but at least you'll know what the risk is. Senator Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you again, Director Lee. Looking at the differences between the September 2014 and June 15 and your progress therein, there was 142 million unbilled cleanup costs in 14, and there's nothing listed in June, so all of that backlog of unbilling has been attended to?
We have prioritized our sites differently and aren't sorting them in unbilled and uncollected. We're looking at them in a different way, so from dollar amount and statute of limitations. So we can slice and dice and get that number to you, but right now we don't track it in that manner. So I know unbilled is kind of isn't a conceivable notion, because it's like, why don't they just send them a bill? That's how I felt before I came to the department. It's like, let's bring some stamps and send the bill. It's very complicated, though, because it requires a lot of digging into who are the responsible parties. It could be decades-old facilities. So there's a reason sometimes why these people haven't been billed, or we know that they're in bankruptcy, or there's ongoing litigation, and so we don't send a bill. So there are reasons to do that. So we decided it wasn't really helpful for us to look in those terms. If a site comes up and it's not billed, and it needs a bill, then we will do the required investigation so we can invoice them. If we know that they're in litigation, or they're in bankruptcy, or they're likely an orphan site, then we do that documentation. So we've determined that we're sort of slicing it and dicing it a little bit differently, because we thought it was more important to start from the high end of the costs, those with $1 million and above, and those with pending statute of limitations. So if you would like us to, get back to you with exactly how many is in the unbilled and uncollected,
That's fine.
We'd be glad to do that.
It sounds like you're approaching it from a realistic perspective. It would seem that maybe a category is just to write it off.
Yes, and that's lovingly known as the NIFGRA, which is no further cost recovery action. So we have those two. So eventually,
So that 142 didn't disappear, it just became something else.
it could be that we've determined that, but we have to do our due diligence. We have to say, did we document this? Did we go after responsible parties, et cetera, before we can, approve that we're going to write it off?
Sure. Okay. And then you did note that Fiscal had informed you that it would be unable to meet the needs of your billing system. Did they give you reasons why?
Excuse me, what we need to track in our cost recovery system is fairly complicated, and we've developed a number of metrics that go into this tracking. when we had initial conversations with the folks at Fiscal, we were concerned that the matchup was not going to be good, given what we understood about the way the Fiscal system is put together. But we, Fiscal felt that it would be possible to do this, and we set out on a path of trying to explore the types of routines we would need to have created in order to do the kinds of tracking we need to do for these sites and these cost recovery efforts. Ultimately, some of those routines just can't be encompassed in the scope of the platform Fiscal has. And so now we're looking at what's going to be required to create the system that will be able to do the billing and tracking we need done, because the system we currently have is very old and doesn't, you hear about these old state databases that are really held together with almost a prayer, and that's what we have here. So we can't really make any changes to it.
You had mentioned that you intend to find a new platform that can serve your needs in 2017. Between now and then, are you set back at all, or what's going to happen in the meantime?
We are going to do the best that we can to keep the current system operating and meeting.
Fiscal.
Not Fiscal, our existing cost recovery billing system, CRBS. And this is a system that was created way back when the cleanup program began. So it's decades old. And the platform that it operates on is no longer maintained. So it's a challenge to keep it running.
When you say you're going to find a platform, do you go to the platform store and pick one up? Or is this conceivably a new IT project? Because new IT projects, which I think it probably is a little nervous-making for this body. And we want to make sure that we partner with you and make sure we learn from past mistakes. And do you have any sense of the size and scope and scale of what this new platform would need to be?
We have been working on putting that information together, Senator. It might not surprise you to know that I was cautioned not to say the words IT project.
I'm not surprised. Sorry to ruin your day.
Yes, this will in fact be a new IT project. We are going through
Platform is a much cleaner word, you're right.
Well, it's a happier sounding word. We are going through the procurement process, scoping out the project. A lot of the work was done, the groundwork has been laid because of the discussions we had with the Fiscal staff. So, there are a series of procedures we need to follow in order to get this project out to bid, and we're working with the Caltech folks to do that.